I'm going to go ahead and really get started. So if you have not come to one of these before, or you're new to our mailing list, or you're new to Signet, I'm Sheila. I'm the CEO of Signet Education, and we do a lot of college admissions work. We also do test prep, executive function coaching, standardized test prep. Oh, I said that already, excuse me, tutoring, and graduate admissions consulting. So we really like to think of ourselves as sort of a one-stop shop for educational needs for students in 8th grade and above. And we do work with a lot of college students on a number of these things as well. Most of our webinars are about the college admissions process in the United States, simply because that's the majority of our clients. This is where most people have the most questions and there's the most urgency. So I tend to focus there, but every once in a while we do something on another topic. If there is a topic you would really like to hear about, please put it in the chat. I'm always looking for good ideas. And I also have a podcast where we're going to be doing a lot of Q&A format in the beginning of the year. So if you have questions about something, please submit. I need ideas and I will create the content for you and share it out. I am going to share my screen and then we will get into our presentation. It is a short presentation. I think I have like 9 slides. I tried not to make them too meaty because I want to make sure like this is an amount of information that you can actually digest and do something with. I don't want to overwhelm you. And so there are lots of things I could tell you to focus on, but really there are 5 things I want you to be thinking about. And these are crucial for you to be thinking about this year with your students, in my view, and will help you have a roadmap for success for the rest of the application process. So that's why we've picked out these 5 to focus on today. And as I go, if you have questions, I'm going to keep my chat open. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat or commentary in the chat. You know, I don't want to be just talking at you the whole time. So I love some interaction. If you have questions, we'll stop and we'll tackle your question, but I will leave about 15, almost 20 minutes for questions at the end. And you know, we got kind of a small group here. Though more people may be joining us, you know, I'm happy to coach you through whatever it is, the situation that you're up against, if it's a little bit nuanced or you know, we're not covering it here in these 5 things. So I think our ideal state is we have this happy kid who is like, yes, I know what's up. I'm happy with mom and dad, and I feel good about the college process. This may not be where your kid is right now. So we want to get there. And I know it can be hard to motivate them. If that is a challenge you're facing, you know, we can talk about exactly how to motivate. But sometimes just changing the dynamic is helpful. And so we can talk about that as we go as well. And what I want for you all is to have a sense of peace and confidence as well, because the more confident you feel about the guidance you're providing to your child, the more they're going to be willing to listen to you. Now, of course, it's difficult. You're a parent, they're a teenager, they don't want to listen to you. They'd rather listen to someone else. So you can play them this video and they'll be listening to me. If you do lead with some confidence and you have that confidence in yourself, you know, okay, I understand how these dots connect and why this is going to be helpful for us to do now before we do this other thing. They will hear it. They may not acknowledge that they hear it, but they will hear it, and things will start to get easier. So I want you to have some confidence in what you're doing with your kid too. All right, so let's jump in. I know a lot of parents feel like this college process, particularly in the United States, is very confusing, and there are a jumble of things that you have to do, but nobody really tells you when to do them, how they connect to each other, how all these pieces kind of fit together, right? So I've got my jumble of puzzle pieces over here. And usually when you do a puzzle, you've got a method, right? Everybody kind of has a different method. You know, I know people who like to start with the borders. I know people who like to sort by color or even shape of the puzzle piece and then proceed from there, right? But when it comes to the college process, nobody is really giving you that framework. So I'm hopefully going to give you some of that framework. Now, in a very reduced version, this is an outline of what goes into the college application. right? A college process is a little bit different than the application. I think of the process as the process by which you prepare all this information, which is not all happening in the fall of senior year, right? You are hopefully building a college list throughout the course of your 11th grade year. Their grades are something that they're working towards when they start high school. Test scores, you may take 3 to 6 months to prepare those. The application form, filling that out is probably, you know, a short part of this process, but the information you put on that application form is meant to represent a lifetime, right, of extracurricular activities, your family demographics, relationships with teachers. The essays are really meant to represent, you know, who a student is, and that can be really hard to do in a short amount of word limit, and of course hard to do in a short amount of time writing that material, right? I've got asterisks next to a number of these things because they are not required at every college. Some colleges do not require test scores, right? 80% of colleges in the US today are, a little bit more than 80% actually, are test optional, which means you can apply without a test score. And we've seen the data, there are plenty of kids who get in without test scores. There are a few schools that have brought back the requirement. There are also schools that are test blind, which is, even if you have a perfect score, you can't submit it. So test scores, you got to look into the nuance. Some colleges do not require recommendations. This is becoming an issue of equity. Actually, it has been an issue of equity, but it is now being part of that conversation of equity, that certain students really do benefit from knowing that they have to build relationships with teachers. Teachers are not compensated separately for writing recommendations. I know I had a student at Berkeley High in Northern California 2 years ago. The teachers at her school went on strike from writing recommendations. And it was a very effective strike because the parents all were on the sides of the teachers. The teachers got what they want and the strike was lifted. But not every school requires recommendations. If they do, it'll be 2 teacher recommendations and a counselor recommendations. We will talk about this today. And then not every school requires essays. We have 2 types of essays. We have the personal essay, which most of you probably recognize as the college essay, a general personal statement. And many schools have supplemental essays, but again, not all, and some don't even require a personal essay. And then some colleges no longer require interviews. They may be optional. They may be a bonus thing that you can do, but they're non-evaluative. And they're really meant as an opportunity for you to get to know the school as opposed for them to evaluate you as a candidate. A lot of schools have moved away from interviews into record us a 90-second video and submit it with your application. So they still get some sense of your personality, but they don't have to mobilize an army of alumni to do these, you know, live interviews with people. So it really does depend on the school. Now, even though this is a reduced list, and I kind of talk you through all the elements, I still know this is a lot. So today we are focusing in on these 5 things, which are the things that juniors really need to start bringing more into their awareness, right? We need to start building our college list. Grades matter more than ever in junior year. This is also the year that students are in the most advanced classes they've ever had. Junior year is just crazy academically. Grades really matter this year. It's the last full year of grades that the college will be able to evaluate a candidate on, so they do matter a lot. Test scores, if you know you're going to be applying with them, this is the year to do them. Your activities and work experience, you know, these are extracurriculars, summer activities, things like that. That's something to focus on right now in the winter, thinking about what's going to happen this coming summer. So we will talk about that today. And junior year, looking towards senior fall is often when students are starting to plan or run for elected leadership positions in various organizations. So that's also a way to think about this. And then finally, recommendations is something that you want to request by the end of junior year. And so we've got 5 or 6 months to start thinking about who are we going to ask and how can we strengthen those relationships. So to recap, there's a lot of stuff you could be thinking about. These are the only 5 things I want you thinking about right now. From now till like February, March. This is it, right? There will be other things. We take them phase by phase so you don't get overwhelmed, so your kid doesn't get overwhelmed. So we're going to dive into the first one, which is grades. And grades are really the foundation of college success. And by college success here, I mean success in college. But I also mean success getting into college. um, for as long as we've had surveys about what matters most in college admissions, all kinds of colleges, selective, non-selective, private, public, small, large, tell us that grades are by far the most important thing that they look at. And there are a couple of aspects to grades that they're looking at. Sometimes it's the overall GPA, sometimes it's the rigor of the courses that they've earned these grades in, and sometimes it's the GPA in the most advanced courses. And it really depends on the school, what they think of as most important, but usually it is some combination of the overall grades and the rigor of the courses, right? They want to see students challenging themselves. So because this is something that, matters all the time and matters all 4 years of high school, this is something you kind of always have to have your eyes on, but especially junior year. And I want to make sure you're addressing any issues that you're sensing or seeing, address them earlier than later. Things will only get more complicated. And this doesn't mean take away your student's agency when they say, I got it, I just need to get, another test under my belt or whatever. But it does mean take those issues seriously and help your student understand how important their grades are, because they can be involved in all kinds of wonderful extracurricular leadership activities. They could be doing so much community service, but none of that matters as much as how strong their grades are. Right. So what my advice for you here is first to step back a little. Try to resist being the homework police. Try to resist being their outsourced executive functions. We need to allow them to start taking ownership, responsibility for their performance in school. This does not mean you can't help them. So step back at the appropriate amount and don't just pull the rug out from underneath them, right? But try to transition into being more of a supporter and a champion of your student rather than the director or the coordinator, right? Mom shouldn't be the one who knows all the assignments and when they're due and when you need to start working on them, right? The student should be that person, and the student should feel empowered to ask you for help if they need it. If they need help finding an organizational system, if they need help getting started on an assignment, of course you're going to help them, right? But we want to put the onus on them to start asking for that help instead of just expecting it. Right. And that can be tricky to negotiate. And this is something we can talk about more if this is something you feel like you're struggling with a little bit with your kids. The second thing is to help your student now zoom out, step back a little bit. And I like to say, let's find their strengths first. Help them understand what their strengths are. These may be academic strengths, they may be social strengths, they may be, any kind of strengths, but we want to start there to help them feel empowered and confident and understand that, when you put your mind to something, you really can do really wonderful things. And then we also want to pinpoint, here's where we're struggling, right? And don't leave it as a blanket, I'm bad at math, but really get underneath the struggle to say, we need to learn how to study for this kind of test. Or we need to work on memorizing formulas because you're in a geometry class and it's all based on formulas. If you can't remember those, we're not going to do well. Or we need to work on your note-taking in class because that's where this information seems to just sort of go out the window, right? And the more specific you can get in pinpointing what the problem is, the kind of root cause of the problem, the easier the solution will be to find and to implement, and the better your student will feel about their own abilities, right? You can be brilliant and, get concepts right away, but if you can't manage your homework load or study for a test, that's probably not going to show up. Your brilliance is not going to show up in the grade, right? But pinpointing, okay, we need to learn how to study for this or organize your papers better or whatever, it doesn't mean they're stupid. They can't interpret that as, oh, I'm stupid. It can be, oh, I just need to learn the skill so that my brilliance can actually shine, right? And so breaking it down into these parts can actually help your student, if they are struggling, feel more confident in their own abilities, because they'll understand where they're really strong and what few things they need to adapt or change. A third thing is to encourage self-advocacy. So this is kind of connected to you stepping back, but we also need to teach our students to ask for help, right? Ask for help from you, ask for help from their peers, from their teachers, from a tutor, from whatever it is. And I know we just live in a society where, independence is valorized. It is very hard to ask for help. I struggle to ask for help myself. But the more we do it, the more we do it in front of our kids, we can model this skill for them, the more they will do it, because obviously it takes a village. And there are people who are more than willing to help your child. They just need to indicate that they need that help. And in the age of social media and all of the kind of crazed competition about college, it can be very hard for them to admit that they need help, or that things aren't going well, or you know, ask for help from a teacher. But that's literally what a teacher is there for, and what tutors are there for, and what, all the network that you've built is also there for. So help them learn that skill. And you want to remember, if you've got a junior, they're going to be leaving home in about 1.5 years, and they're going to have to figure out how to live independently. And there are, of course, going to be times where they need to ask for help when they're off at college. And so you can start normalizing this now, and start building this skill now too. And then the last thing in this sort of winter timeframe that you want to be thinking about with grades is making sure that they are choosing challenging classes for next year. And you know your student best. Your teachers, their teachers know them well as well. So get input from their teachers, but try to get them to take challenging classes that they can still do well in. Right? We don't want them over their head and drowning, but we also don't want them just coasting, right? The place that they learn is where they're a little bit out of their comfort zone. And at the same time, you have to balance how many challenging classes are they taking, and what does this overall workload look like, right? But you want to be strategic about that, and sort of don't be caught flat-footed when it comes time to choose classes, which is usually in March or April. All right, so that's great. I'm going to take a sip of water. So if anybody has a question, this would be a great time to ask it. While you're still thinking, I did mention don't be the outsourced executive function. I want to call that out here too, because if your student is struggling with their executive function development, it is absolutely worth getting them some help to build, time management, organization skills, study skills, test taking skills, because things will only get harder from here. So if you're seeing any of that, you can reach out. We'll talk with you about it, what kind of intervention may be helpful. But you really do want to kind of get a jump on that sort of thing at this stage. All right, moving on. Let's go to the college list. I see the college list as your roadmap for applications. If you know where you're applying, you know what you want to emphasize in the stories you tell, what kind of qualities you would want your recommenders to be writing about. You know what essays, literally like the word count and the prompt, that you will have to write this summer. And you will also, if you have a good list, you may be wanting to apply early somewhere. So you'll have a timeline as well. So this is something we at Signet spend a lot of time on. I usually start at the end of the summer after sophomore year with my students, and we are wrapping up our list building process around now. I've got a couple of students who are still kind of doing research and talking to students and things like that to get this short list before their February break or their spring break, so that they can go on some college visits if they want to. And your list is going to be a little bit fluid, but by the middle of summer, you should be pretty locked in, at least on where you're applying early, so that you can focus on those applications. But the list could change all the way up to the deadline. But it's important that you take a really strategic, intentional approach to building that list, and you're not just like taking the top 20 off of the rankings, or so-and-so mentioned this school, so we'll just throw it on here. You really want to have a plan. So the last webinar we did in November was all about how to build a college list. So I'm not going to go into a whole bunch more detail here. But if you want to view that webinar, you can go to our YouTube page and you'll find it there. Very shorthand, what you want to do to build your college list is to start by defining the preferences, the wants and the needs of the student. Like what might they want to study, or what kind of people do they want to be around? What kind of campus do they want to be on, size-wise, an area of the country? What kind of opportunities do they want to have on campus? They want a built-in co-op program, really robust study abroad, an emphasis on foreign languages, an undergraduate business program. Like, what do they want? Before you even start thinking about names of schools. And it is very abstract, but as you start to think through something like the Compass Campus Checklist, which was included with the last webinar. If you don't have it, I can send it again. But it's literally just, a list of categories, and you start thinking through them with your student. They might surprise you that they've got some clear ideas about how they envision their college life. They may surprise you in a good way or in a bad way. But then what you want to do is take those preferences to a search engine, get a large list, usually 40 to 50 schools, and then start to research each of those schools to validate what your student thought they wanted, right? I get a lot of kids who tell me they really want to go to a big college, want to have that traditional college feel. And then I show them schools like UCLA, University of Michigan, UT Austin, which are the biggest colleges out there. And they're like, no, I meant big as in 3,000, because maybe it's a little bigger than their high school, but it's not big as far as universities go, right? So helping them see how those preferences actually look in real life can help them revise their preferences a little bit, right? But we really want to, again, empower them to have some agency to say what they want. It is a great way to start the conversation and center, what they think they want and they need. And you'll go through many iterations of this research, but it's really important that your student is able to articulate why they do like or why they don't like a particular school that ended up on the list. It's far easier for them to say like why they don't like something, but that can also be very informative, because usually it means they will like the opposite. Like if they don't like an open campus, they should probably like a closed campus. If they don't like a big school, they should probably like a small school, right? So you can use that. They like to hate and complain on things, but you can use that to create a positive vision of what they might be looking for, and then say, okay, what about this school? It doesn't have any of the things that you didn't like. Do you like it? And as you kind of get this list together, you can then build your short list for either visits or a virtual information session, or talking to a student, or talking to somebody in the admissions office. They might come to your school or visit a college fair, and then you'll really get a better sense of kind of the character and culture of the school to see that it is really a match for your student. So that's the college list. And I will say, I like to spend 4 to 6 months on this. It's not too late to start, but it is important that you do it somewhat methodically. All right, I'm gonna pick up the pace a little bit here. We'll go to standardized testing. It can be very important, but like I shared at the beginning, it is not always necessary. There are plenty of schools that don't want a test score, or will be very happy to look at other aspects of a student's profile and can make a great decision without a test score. So, we've got test blind and test optional. If your student is really sure that they want to go to one of the schools where it is required, then you're going to have to do this process. But wherever you fall on that spectrum of wanting to test, not wanting to test, I think it's really important to make an informed decision. Part of that comes from understanding there are 2 tests, and then we also have test optional and test blind and test required. What do all these things mean? And then also thinking about, where does your student actually stand with these tests? So we'll just go through this in order. The timing, I would really love for you to have a plan by next month. This doesn't mean you have to start prep or register for a test date, but a plan. That we are testing or we are not testing. We will test in June, or we will test in July, or whatever it is, you have a plan, right? And then I think it's really important to be done with testing by the end of the summer. Ideally, we're done with testing by the end of this school year so that they can spend the summer doing whatever it is that they're going to do this summer and writing their college essays instead of still worrying about test prep. It can be a bit of a distraction from these other things that they should be moving on to. But in some cases you just need to do it again. You can test as late as into December of senior year, but again, I don't recommend leaving it towards to that late. So the SAT and the ACT are two college admissions tests that every college, every four-year college in the United States accepts without any kind of bias or preference. And what I always tell families is the tests are different, and different students are going to like different tests. The SAT tends to be a little bit more brain teasery. You have more time per question. The reading level is a little bit higher, more advanced. The ACT is a far more straightforward test, but you have far less time per question. And you also have a science section on the ACT, which is really just a technical reading section. You're reading charts and graphs, and it works exactly the way the reading comprehension section works on the ACT. But some students either really love it or they really hate it. Both tests test generally the same exact material, the same kind of math, the same kind of grammar, even some of those principles of reading charts and graphs are on both the SAT and the ACT. They just ask their questions in different ways, and your student has different time to respond. The best way to know which test your student is better suited to is to try one of each. And these are freely available. Many juniors in the United States just took the PSAT in October and got their results back a couple weeks later. That is your SAT diagnostic. That is essentially what a PSAT is. Same format as the SAT, and it can tell you, if you were to take the SAT today, this is how you do. And then the ACT, there are practice tests freely available on the ACT website. If you want to do a more structured diagnostic process with us, I can send you one for free. We'll have your student do the test under somewhat realistic conditions. We'll grade it, we'll compare it to their PSAT score. If you need them to do an SAT, we can set that up too. And I can tell you what we're seeing in there in terms of their strengths, how long I think it would take them to get to the goal score that they might need for the colleges that they're looking at, and what they should focus on in their prep. And we can do that with extra time if your student qualifies for those accommodations. So I really recommend that every student do some sort of diagnostic process. You don't have to do it with me if you don't want to, but it's there for you if you need it, so that you have the data, right? And you can understand what the colleges that you're thinking about, because you're building your college list, you can understand their testing policies, and you can see what are the average SAT or ACT scores for the classes that they've recently admitted, and see how your students' initial diagnostic scores compare to those averages and whether it's necessary based on the policies. And then you have all the information you need to make an informed decision about should they test, if they're going to test, which test are they going to do, and when are they going to test, and what kind of prep are we going to do, right? And I know it feels like a whole bunch of moving parts, but really all we need your student to do is think about a couple colleges they might want to go to, do the 2 tests, and then we have like a half an hour phone call, and that's it. Then the last thing I'll say is don't overdo it. I get a lot of kids who are like, I got a 1520, but I really wanted a 1580 or a 1600 on the SAT. That's great. 1520 is an amazing score. 1580 is a great score. A perfect score would be great too. But a college doesn't really care after a certain point, right? They're going to move on to be more evaluative of your essays and your leadership and what teachers are saying about you, right? So 20, 30 points on the SAT is not going to make a lick of difference for you. And so you really want to make sure that you have a target score that is reasonable, that will work for the schools you're looking at, and then be done. Right? Because we've got other things to do and other things to focus on and lives to live. Like, we can't just spend all our time doing SAT and ACT prep, okay? There are more important things in life. A lot of people are like, good enough, that doesn't sound good at all. But no, that's really a thing. Like, get to a place where you know these scores are good enough and then move on, right? So keep it in a container. All right. now we'll move on to number 4, which is part of the activities and work experience. The thing to be thinking about that right now is, what is your kid going to do this summer? And I like to think about it like a mini college process, because you can actually use writing, processes, organizational tools that you use for planning your summer for the overall college process. Right? I especially love reusing essays. That's great when we don't have to write a whole new essay. The reason I say start in December is because your student may really want to do some kind of program that has an early deadline, right? There's a research program called RSI. The deadline was the 11th of December, right? That's one of the earliest ones out there. Yale has a great program called Yale Global Scholars. Their deadline is the second week of January. Most of the other programs have deadlines in February and March, and some programs that are not even selective, you literally just register for them, they will fill up early, right? It's a little bit of like a Hunger Games situation for summer planning. You might remember this from when your kids were young and needed like childcare over the summer. You got to know when the registration opens and gets there. Joe, you've got a great question. There are a couple of resources out there that list some programs. None of them is comprehensive. And, you know, a program is just one option of many that your student may want to do. I have a lot of students who are creating their own opportunities. Once we get clear on what are their preferences and what are their needs, there may be specific goals that we want to achieve, right? If they're preparing for a career in, I don't know, let's say medicine or scientific research, they may want to build some coding skills or at least stata or R that are going to help them like analyze large data sets for a research study, right? So you could go to a pre-med kind of 1 or 2 week program. Those can be really great and give students lots of exposure and super fun. But if your student doesn't need that kind of exposure, or they've done a program like that before, it might actually be even more valuable for them to enroll in some kind of coding program over the summer, or some sort of research methods course, or to shadow a doctor, or to go abroad and work in a clinic, so that they are building the skills that they want to build that are really going to launch them into the next phase of their journey on this path. So I like to start with not like, here are the programs, but what do we actually want for our kid, right? And a lot of the times it may not be career related. It could be fun. It could be creative. It could be social. It could be related to volunteer work or a nonprofit, some cause that they really care about. It could be they're learning a new language, a new musical instrument. I had a student last year who wanted to she likes to write poetry, and she wanted to get to 400 poems by the end of the summer. I had another student who is applying to a lot of these art type programs. She's a design student. She had to put together a portfolio. She spent most of her summer working on art that was going to go into her portfolio that she was going to submit with a college application. So helps to step back a little bit and think about, what do we really need? You may be going on a vacation. You may have some other plans that you need to work around. So you got to figure out your dates and, you know, all of these things. It can be a little complicated to put the puzzle together, but start there. Identify preferences and needs, just like with the college list. Then you want to go explore matches. So there are a couple of places that you can go. One of them is called Teen Life. I believe it's just teenlife.com. Google is your friend here, like high school summer program for STEM research. Or I had a woman on a call recently who was like, my kid really loves planetary geology, like geology, but not of this planet, of other planets. And I was like, well, that's really specific. We can Google for that. And we found, you know, a couple of programs that actually would give them some exposure to that. There's another one, I think it's called summermatch.me. Don't quote me on that URL, but you can Google summer program finder and, you know, it'll be there. You'll find the same summer programs listed on both of those things. I know a bunch of people who are building tools right now, and I'm like, this is so sorely needed. They're just not ready yet. And as you are thinking about the matches, you want to set a budget because some of these programs can be really expensive. You may not feel comfortable with your kid living on the other side of the country for 6 weeks on a college campus, or maybe that's something they really need. So think about that, the logistics. You also want to make sure you save time for their college applications. I really want students to spend a large chunk of their summer getting a head start on those essays, filling out the forms, getting all of that stuff kind of squared away and all their ducks in a row. So the work is quite minimal when school starts again in the fall. You want to give the process enough time because you might have to write an essay or two. I had, a couple kids apply to this RSI program. There are 6 essays. That's a lot. You have to ask for recommendations. You might need to create a resume. If you're trying to create your own opportunity, you may need to do some networking. And so this could take time. This is another reason I say you can start now in December, even though summer is not for another 6 months. And then even if you know what you want to do, just submit that thing early, right? There are early deadlines, programs fill up. I want to make sure you've got your options, right? So lock it in as soon as you know what you're doing. All right, now we are rounding the corner here. And the last thing I want you to start thinking about this winter is building relationships with teachers for recommendations. So I mentioned most colleges that ask for recommendations want 2 teacher recommendations, and they should be teachers that fairly recent, that know your student quite well, and preferably have taught them in a more challenging course, right? Because the whole project of the college application is to help a college admissions officer envision your child being successful on their campus, right? And the closest academic experience they're going to have to a college course or whatever their most advanced classes in high school are, right? So that's why what these teachers say about your students are so important to the college admissions officers, right? And it's not like you've got to ask the teacher where you've got the best grade. I've seen amazing recommendations come from teachers for classes where the student might have struggled a little bit, but the teacher saw that student struggle, saw their grit and resilience, saw their self-advocacy, their desire to get better, and how much hard work they put in, and whatever incremental improvement they made, even if it didn't get them to the A+ or whatever it might be, that really made an impression on the teacher. And those are the kinds of things that college admissions officers really love hearing about, because college is going to be challenging for them, right? No matter how great they are as a student right now, it's a whole different ballgame, right? And so they really want to understand, can this student roll with the punches? Are they going to be able to meet the challenge? They do want to see disciplined study habits, character, intellectual curiosity, how they treat their peers, how they treat their teachers. In another version of this presentation, I actually show a recommendation form, and the top half of the recommendation form is a bunch of ratings, about 15 to 20 categories where a teacher rates the student, below average, average, above average, the best I've ever seen in my career on all of these different categories. And most of them are related to character and social interaction, not, how smart is this kid? Because they've got grades for that, right? They don't really need to hear about that. What they want to hear are these more sort of personal qualities. So I would start thinking about which 2 teachers you want to ask, depending on what your student is thinking about majoring in, or if they're like applying to an engineering school. There may be some specific recommendations for who you should ask, right? Most engineering schools want an advanced math recommendation and an advanced science recommendation. If you're applying to, a program that has to do with international relations and a lot of foreign languages, then a foreign language teacher is probably going to make a lot of sense there. Or of course, a creative writing program, you want your English teacher, right? So think about that, how the recommenders can address, your students' readiness for whatever it is that they think they want to pursue at college. But even if your student's going to be an applied math major, sometimes the English teacher recommendation is a really great one, because it shows another side of this student that the college should really see. Right. And I have a lot of parents telling me, well, they hate all their teachers. They don't have great relationships. Well, it's time to turn that ship around. We got about 5 months to the end of the year. And you want to make sure that, these are genuine relationships they're building. So when your student stays a little bit after class, shows some genuine interest in the topic, thanks a teacher. Those can all be really wonderful things to start building those relationships. All right. We got through the top 5 things that you need to focus on this winter. We're going to do Q&A in a second. But if you're like, okay, I got these 5 things, now what? The now what might just be a conversation with someone on my staff. This is not necessarily to set up, paid help, but it can be, helpful to get someone else's opinion on what's going to be helpful for your kid. So the QR code that's here goes directly to my colleague Emmeline's calendar. She speaks to every single client at Signet. She herself went to Harvard for undergrad and master's. She's applying for her PhD programs right now. She's a psych major. She has a specialty in executive function and learning challenges. She's an excellent writing coach, and she does a lot of college admissions work with us as well. So she will be able to answer your questions about anything that we do, anything that might be related to the college process. So I encourage you to set up a call with her there. We've got about 15 minutes, like I said, where we can go through your questions and we can get as specific as you like to. So Eugen already put a question in. What advice could you give to a student who wants to do research with a professor, but no one is responding to his emails? Well, one thing I will say is you have to be persistent. It may be the time of year, right? Most professors are winding down their semester. They may be in the middle of grading and finals, and they're not really thinking about the summer yet. So I would just continue to follow up, maybe 1 email a month. To hopefully get a response. I think we also would want to look at how they're asking. I have a lot of students go straight for the ask, can I do research with you this summer? Can I join your lab? But I encourage my students to actually read some papers of these professors and ask a meaningful question. Or share, oh, I learned this thing in my biology class and then I saw your paper. I'm really curious about how you got into your field. Could we have a Zoom coffee and can I pick your brain about this, right? You put that professor in a position of mentorship, not in a position of hire me, right? And then that starts to open the door. And maybe this professor has something for them to do. Maybe they come up with a project together, or maybe this professor knows somebody else that needs something that your student can offer. So think of it more as relationship building rather than an ask in the actual email. The other thing you can do is be creative about how you get into research, right? There may be no direct connection between you and a professor, but maybe somebody knows a grad student in the lab, right? And maybe you go to the grad student, not to the PI, right? Grad students sometimes are able to take on interns or have a kid shadow them. And that may be the way in, right? And it could turn into something more. The other thing I'll say, there are a lot of places out there now that you pay a fee, you get assigned a research mentor, and your student goes through a structured research program. I've had students who do them. Particularly, I'm closer with the people at Polygents. And I believe I have I don't know what that was, but I have that's not the discount link, that's their website. I have they gave us a discount link where you get a 10% discount on their fees if you go through us. So if that's something you're interested in, just send me an email. I'll find the link and I'll send it to you. But another really great one is Lumiere. There are AI focused ones. There's one that's more of like a 6-month research program. It's actually a little bit more highly respected than some of these other ones that are just like a 10-week program, called Pioneer Academy. So these programs are out there. If you can't get a response from a professor, you could always go that route as well. But great question. What other questions do we have? You're welcome, you too. I know you have questions. Don't be shy. What were you hoping to hear about but didn't?
Sheila, it's Kafi. I am curious, as we think about the summer, um, about how to really prioritize them. I really appreciate the guidance you've provided so far about the different types of things we might consider and sort of like really what are we trying to accomplish. I have
Mm-hmm.
a student who has done a number of summer programs already.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering, should we really be prioritizing other types of development or opportunities that are not program specific or like specific
Yeah.
to a discipline?
Yep. Yep. That's a great question, especially if, I know your son, I won't say his name, but if your son has already done a number of structured programs, maybe he's ready for something a little more independent, right? It could be some sort of research mentorship or just an office job somewhere where he's working directly with somebody in a field that he's interested in. But it could also just be like an independent project, like maybe he wants to write a bunch of short stories or, pull together some things that he's seeing connections between, but no one else is really seeing these connections yet. I also think it's worth looking at the overall profile, right? Are we good on academics? Are we good on testing? Are we good on community service, on ways to demonstrate character, creativity, balance in life, right? Maybe there's a meditation program you could do, right? And it's not so much what you put on the college resume, it's the skills that you take out of it, of that experience, right? So there may be something there that helps round out some other aspect of the program or of the profile, and it's not necessarily a on-campus college program. It could be, volunteering all summer long could be really fun and meaningful for him.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Great. All right, we got a couple of questions in the chat. Joe asked about study habits. Yes, study habits are really tough, especially when students who struggle with their study habits do not want to accept someone else's word for like, do it this way, it'll help. Part of that is like they just want to do it the way they want to do it, and they are not interested in change. Study habits are like boring. Yeah, who wants to talk about study habits? But one way to make them a little more exciting is to try to tap into something that your student is really motivated by. So if they're motivated by, watching TikTok videos on their phone or just being with their friends, you can help them see how getting just a little more organized in how they do their homework or how they keep track of what's due when will actually allow them to have more free time. And when they're having that free time, there's nothing hanging over their head like, oh my God, I know I should be studying for that test or I should start that paper, right? They'll actually be able to enjoy those things even more and spend less time doing the things that they don't want to do if they can improve their study habits. So I think tapping into that motivation is really the first stage of addressing study habits. The second thing is, I know as adults, we know what works for us, or hopefully we're figuring out what works for us. But we sometimes forget that our kids are their own people, and that what works for us may not work for them. Right. So we really do want to hold space for, hey, this is what I do. Like I use this kind of planner and I take notes while I'm in meetings or whatever, and then I process those notes. It is not going to work for my son, right? What is going to work for him? We don't know. We got to try a bunch of things. But I like to start with, what do you think would help you be better at this problem that you yourself have identified? And let's try that for a week. And then let's reflect on that and see, well, what worked about it? We definitely want to keep that. What didn't work about it? We probably want to change that, right? And then it's an iterative process. So that's probably as much as I could tell you, Joe, in like this format, but of course I'm happy to talk and see what we can do, because sometimes it really does take changing up the dynamic, right? Like working with someone who is not mom or dad to help them hear what you've been saying all along. Christina asks, how important is 3 to 4 years of a foreign language? That's actually not the requirement at many colleges. Some colleges, and especially if you are going into a program where a foreign language is like required. Like I studied Near Eastern languages and civilizations. I had to study Arabic. It was very important for me to come in with language skills. Some high schools have a 4-year requirement or a 2-year requirement. Most colleges don't require more than 2 years. So the message that is being sent by staying in 4 years of a foreign language beyond what a high school or a college might require might be indicating some interest or passion that the student has, more than anything. But I'm going to make some assumptions about why you're asking this question. If your kid doesn't want to take 3rd or 4th year Spanish, whatever it is, make sure they're replacing it with something that's meaningful. But it's not going to, break their chances of getting into a certain college. Though you do want to check the policies at each college you want to apply to make sure it's not a requirement or maybe recommended. So check that. Cindy asks, how important are sophomore year grades? Well, grades are always important. Junior year grades are definitely the most important. And college admissions officers do understand that sometimes students need an adjustment period to high school, or if in sophomore year all of a sudden we jumped into 3 AP classes and we weren't in any before, they'll understand, okay, there's increase of rigor and they need to like kind of adjust to this. But we really want to see a grade trend that goes up. And I will tell you that some schools care more than others, right? There is some intense competition for some very specific selective colleges. Cindy, I know you know what they are. You have other children at those colleges, and they are going to care, right? When the competition has no dips in the transcript, they're going to care, right? So I can't tell you that like there's anything that could be done to, I don't know, counteract a poor grade some year. But if there is context or some other circumstances that can help explain it, that can be helpful, as long as we see improvement in those grades in the time after. Oh, City's got a bunch of questions here. These are good. What is your take on the alumni interview in the admissions process? It really depends on the school. At some schools, it's extremely important. And at some schools, it makes no difference at all. And they just do it as a way to make the alumni feel like they're more involved and connected to the school. And then they get better donations. So it really depends on the school. Most of the time, the college will indicate how important it is. A lot of the time, the interview's importance is related to the size of the school. Like if you have a really, really small college, the interview, making sure the personality fit is there is pretty important. And at many of those small colleges, you actually interview with a college admissions officer, not an alum. But at the more selective, bigger schools, usually the alumni interview is either a way to keep the alum involved, and or a way to just confirm that everything we're seeing on the application is actually reflected in the person, right? So I don't think I've ever heard of a situation where an interview like saved an application from the reject pile, but certainly can confirm an impression that the application itself gave. All right, and then the last question from Cindy is, how do colleges see varsity sports participation? My child is on a varsity team, but not good enough yet for recruiting. And that's fine. There are some colleges that recruitment is a really important part of their process. They set aside 25% of their income in class for recruited athletes, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes they just want to see that, your student is passionate about something, can work on a team, has a level of has developed, worked at something to develop a level of skill. And it's not a matter of, okay, they're going to come and join our field hockey team or whatever it is. But I will say that this is also part of that equity conversation. The club sports industry is a several billion-dollar industry in the United States. And, it's not lost on me that there are expensive sports that often lead to college recruitment, like fencing and lacrosse and things like that. You don't have to do that to get in, but it is certainly a pathway that some people use. I'm getting on my soapbox, so I'll step off. Any other questions before I let you all go? We got about 2 minutes left. Eugen is still debating about college counseling. What would you advise? He is not a bad student, I'm guessing, but not sure either to get to the school he wants to go. So I will say college counseling can be helpful for anybody because it can be a sounding board in your corner. It can be someone that can really open up a relationship with your child and help them dig deep into whatever is going to go in their personal essay and help them see how remarkable they are and build confidence and just manage the stress so you don't have to figure all this out by yourself. At Signet, we do everything on an hourly basis. So actually just talked to a family who only wants to do 1 hour with us in January, just to get a plan together, and then they're going to go forward on their own, and that's fine, right? As much as we can help, we're happy to help. There are people who want to meet with us 2-3 times a week to get their essays done, especially at a time like this, right before deadlines, 3 weeks before deadlines. So you can ramp up, ramp down as you need it. I would say have a conversation with my colleague Emmeline. We can get a little bit more details, and she'll be able to tell you, like, I don't think you really need much help, or maybe some clarifying conversations around this thing would be helpful for you. That's how I'd recommend going about it. And of course, it's as important to find the right college counselor for you as it is to find the right college, right? So I encourage you to speak to a couple. You can speak to a couple on my team. You can speak to a number of different companies. You want to make sure you are really aligned with their philosophy, so that it's a good match. That's where you're going to have the best results. You are welcome. All right, everybody. We are at time. Thank you for spending part of your evening with me. I hope that this was helpful. The recording will go out next day or two. And along with the recording, you're going to get a series on how to figure out the summer plan. So I hope that that will be helpful. And then I don't have the date yet, but it will be sometime in the 3rd week of January. We're going to do a panel with a bunch of my former admissions officers, and we're just going to take your questions. So keep an eye out for that as well. Hope we'll see you there, and Happy New Year and happy holidays. All right, everybody. Have a good night. Bye.